In the name of one God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. For the past few weeks, we've been silent witnesses to the train wreck that is Job. We've caught glimpses of the suffering, the plea for justice, God's response, and next week, spoiler alert, it's all made well, and the Lord gives Job twice as much as he had before. In a manner that's a bit like the evening news, these glimpses are repeated out of context and without benefit of the whole story. Just as a good newsroom editor might plan, we're first brought in with the pain and suffering of Job. We don't even see all of it. Missing from our view was the loss of his wealth and his family. But we see enough suffering to feel for Job and to want to know more. We know that he was blameless and upright, meaning he had integrity and spiritual maturity. And from the little soundbite that we've been given, but Job is not privy to, it appears that God has approved of Satan torturing this man. Despite all this, Job doesn't curse the Lord, and he chastises his wife for suggesting otherwise. In our next news update, which we heard last week, Job makes a plea to the fair judgment of God. He believes that if he can be heard, all will be well. But he doesn't feel that God is hearing him. If I go forward, he's not there. Or backwards, I cannot perceive him. On the left, he hides, and I cannot behold him. I turn to the right, but I cannot see him. In his anguish, he can't see or hear God. This week, it's God who responds. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? And then we walk through the mysteries of creation and learn something of the character of God. The intricacies and interrelated nature of creation remain a mystery. We even see that suffering is part of creation. Who provides for the raven its prey when its young ones cry to God and wander about for lack of food? We may not be able to understand the pains of hunger, but God provides so that the hungry are fed and the thirsty are quenched. Next week, Job will utter his contrition to God. Therefore, I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. Job's come to realize that God's ways are not our ways. And there is a mystery, whether it be in creation or our lives, that we're just not able to understand. At the depths of his suffering, Job thought of God as the enemy. Job now realizes that God's not an enemy to be challenged, but God's a friend and a companion. For Job, seeing God as a companion makes the suffering bearable. He now trusts in the mysterious ways of the Lord. There are times in most of our lives when we probably considered Job to be a lightweight. We likely thought his trials paled in comparison to our own challenges. Carry my burden, Job, and let's see how you do. Well, Job set for us an example to be followed. There are times in all of our lives when we'll follow in the footsteps of Job. Strength can be found in knowing that no amount of suffering will keep God from being close to us. And it's with that knowledge that Job overcame the pains of Satan. God actually honored Job by testing him. God knew that Job's faith would withstand the assault of Satan. And Satan was humiliated and defeated by Job. Through it all, Job was honest with God. He shared every tear and every doubt. He never asked for restoration. He just wanted to know that God was with him. Several years ago, BBC television had a series on called Rev. Unlike an earlier, much sillier predecessor, The Vicar of Dibley, this show was brutally honest and featured a very real and very flawed priest. The vicar, Adam Smallbone, often sat on a park bench with a beer in one hand and a cigarette in the other, and he prayed to God in the most honest of ways. Like Job, he shared his tears and he shared his doubts. In the final episode of the series, Adam is seen physically carrying his cross. Now, without spoiling your search on Netflix and viewing this, I will only say Adam did learn that God was present, and it made all the difference. In response to the request for a seat of honor by James and John in the Gospel, Jesus poses his own question. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? Without understanding, James and John don't realize that Jesus speaks of his own passion. Following Christ may include suffering and sorrow, but it doesn't include being alone. Adam Smallbone may not have understood the predicament with which he was faced. Knowing that God was present made it all bearable. Job doesn't answer the age-old question of why bad things happen to good people. But we do learn through Job's story that even painful times are made bearable through God's presence. This past week, Archbishop Justin Welby preached at the consecration. I thought this might get me. He preached at the consecration of Emmanuel Chapel at Virginia Seminary. His opening words brought back the painful memories of watching the previous chapel burn. Archbishop Welby said, and I will quote, though not with the English accent, "In 2010, to the glory of God, this chapel burned and was rebuilt 2015. I am slightly misquoting, but with a full heart. The brass letters set in the floor at the back of Coventry Cathedral. To the glory of God, this cathedral burned 14 November 1940 and was rebuilt 25 May 1962. To the glory of God, this chapel burned. Is it possible? Can such an event ever be seen to be to the glory of God? Why, yes. Because in death and resurrection, we are drawn back into the presence of the living God who raised Jesus Christ from the dead." Archbishop Welby could have been speaking of Job. He could have been speaking of our own trials. It's not without some level of providence that these words were spoken in Emmanuel Chapel. Emmanuel, after all, means God with us. Job learned and forged the path for us to know that with God present in our suffering, we can be comforted and blessed. Job wasn't alone as he faced the whims of Satan. Christ was not alone on the cross. We're not alone either. In good times and in bad, God is with us, always.